Stop whining. It's already sold. Those were the words that changed everything. My son Mike stood in my kitchen like he owned the place, arms crossed, completely unbothered by the devastation he'd just delivered. I needed that money for my trip to Italy. I stared at him, my hands still wet from washing dishes, Frank's coffee mug trembling in my grip. You sold your father's Rolex without asking me. Mom, seriously, get over it. It's just a watch. Just a watch. 6 months after burying my husband of 43 years, and my own son had stolen the only thing of Frank's I wore every day, wound every morning like Frank taught me, feeling connected to him through that simple ritual. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The thing about betrayal is that it has a taste. Bitter, metallic, like pennies on your tongue. Standing there in my Chicago kitchen, staring at my 42-year-old son who apparently thought grief had an expiration date, I tasted it fully for the first time. Which pawn shop? I asked quietly. Mike's wife, Ashley, looked up from her phone. Oh good. She's being reasonable now. Her voice dripped with that particular condescension she'd perfected over the years. Honestly, Dorothy, clinging to material possessions isn't healthy. Frank wouldn't want you living in the past. Don't tell me what Frank would want, I thought, but bit my tongue. Ashley had been telling me what Frank would want since the funeral, usually whenever it involved me giving them something. Golden State Pawn on Milwaukee Avenue, Mike said, checking his watch, an expensive Apple thing that probably cost more than Frank's Rolex was worth. They gave me $800. Not bad for something that old. $800 for a 1978 Rolex Submariner that Frank had saved 3 months of overtime to buy when Mike was born. The watch Frank wore every single day of our marriage except the day he died, when the hospital handed it to me in a plastic bag with his wedding ring. That watch was worth at least $3,000, I said. Ashley snorted. In what universe? It wasn't even running properly. Because I was the one winding it, keeping it alive, keeping Frank alive in some small way. But they wouldn't understand that. Mike and Ashley lived in a world where everything had a price tag and nothing had a memory. I'm going to get it back, I announced. Good luck with that, Mike said, heading for the door. We fly out tomorrow morning. Ashley's been planning this trip for months. Ashley followed him, pausing at the door with that fake sympathetic expression she wore whenever she wanted to seem caring. Dorothy, you really should consider therapy. This obsession with Frank's things isn't normal. The door slammed, leaving me alone with the bitter taste of betrayal and the silence that had become my constant companion since Frank died. But here's what Mike and Ashley didn't know about their pathetic old mother. I'd spent 40 years as a bank manager. I knew the difference between giving up and strategic planning, and I was done giving up. The pawn shop was exactly what I'd expected. Cramped, dusty, with the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everything look sickly. The man behind the counter had arms covered in tattoos and the weary expression of someone who'd seen every sob story in the book. You hear about the Rolex? He asked before I even opened my mouth. How did you know? Your son warned me you might show up. Said you were having a hard time letting go. He shrugged apologetically. Look, lady, I feel for you, but business is business. I paid fair market value. Fair market value. As if there was a standard price for 43 years of marriage. For the sound of Frank winding that watch every morning while his coffee brewed, for the weight of it in my hands when the hospital nurse placed it there alongside his wedding ring. I'll buy it back. Whatever you need. The man, his name tag read Danny, looked uncomfortable. It's already sold. Guy came in this morning, paid cash, no returns in this business. My heart sank. Some stranger was walking around Chicago wearing Frank's watch. And I'd never see it again because my son needed pizza money for his Italian vacation. But here's the thing, Danny continued, lowering his voice. We found something weird when we were cleaning it up for sale. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a small manila envelope. There was a hidden compartment in the back. Real professional job had to have been done by a jeweler. Found this inside. Inside the envelope was a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. In Frank's careful handwriting, Dorothy's birthday, July 15, 1955. The day I knew I'd marry her. Below that, a series of numbers and letters that looked like some kind of code. SS 4457CH0815DS. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. Frank had never mentioned any hidden compartment. In 43 years of marriage, he'd kept this secret hidden in plain sight on his wrist. You recognize those numbers? Danny asked. I shook my head, but something about them nagged at me. They looked familiar, like a password or account number. Frank had been meticulous about record keeping, always writing down important numbers in his careful handwriting. The guy who bought the watch, I said suddenly. What did he look like? Danny's expression shifted, became more guarded. Why? Because my husband hid this for a reason, and I think whoever bought that watch might be in for a surprise. Ma'am, I really can't. Please. I leaned forward, letting Danny see the grief that was still raw after 6 months. That watch is all I have left of him. I'm not asking you to break any laws. I just want to know if the buyer seemed to know about the compartment. Danny was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Finally he sighed. He didn't say much, but when I mentioned we'd found something inside, he got real interested. Asked if we'd opened it. A chill ran down my spine. Did he give you a name? Paid cash. No paperwork required for purchases. Danny paused. But he did ask specifically about watches that had come in recently. Said he collected vintage Rolexes. Someone had been looking for Frank's watch specifically. But why? And how did they know about the hidden compartment? I thanked Danny and walked back to my car, the piece of paper burning in my purse like a secret I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Frank had hidden this for 47 years. Hidden it from me. What else had my husband been hiding? That night I sat at Frank's desk in my bedroom, surrounded by 43 years of financial records. Frank had kept everything. Bank statements, tax returns, investment account statements, all filed away in his precise, methodical manner. The code from the watch stared up at me from the piece of paper. SS 4457CH0815DS. I'd been through every account we owned, every investment, every safety deposit box. Nothing matched those numbers. Frank had been financially conservative. Savings account, checking account, a modest retirement fund. Nothing fancy, nothing hidden. Or so I'd thought. My phone rang, interrupting my search. Mike's name flashed on the screen. Mom, Ashley's upset. She says you made a scene at the pawn shop. I almost laughed. In what world was trying to recover my husband's stolen watch making a scene? I went to buy back your father's watch. Unfortunately, someone else already purchased it. The problem solved. Time to move on. The casualness in his voice made my chest tighten with anger. This was Frank's son, the baby Frank had worked double shifts to provide for, the kid Frank taught to throw a baseball and change a tire. When had Mike become this cold? Mike, there was something hidden inside the watch. Your father left me a message. Silence on the other end. Then, what kind of message? I'm not sure yet, but it looks like account numbers or a password. Mom. Mike's voice changed, became more alert. What exactly did the message say? Something in his tone made me hesitate. This was the most interested Mike had sounded in anything related to his father since the funeral. Just some numbers, I said vaguely. Probably nothing important. Maybe I should come over, help you figure it out. Now I did laugh, bitter and sharp. Yesterday you told me to stop living in the past. Today you want to help sort through Frank's things. I'm just trying to be supportive. By stealing his watch. Mike sighed heavily. Fine, be stubborn, but don't come crying to me when you drive yourself crazy chasing ghosts. After he hung up, I stared at the phone. Mike's sudden interest was suspicious, but I couldn't figure out why. He'd made it clear he considered Frank's possessions worthless sentiment. Unless they weren't just sentiment. I returned to the desk, but this time I approached it differently. Instead of looking for accounts that matched the numbers, I started looking for patterns. Frank had been an accountant before his retirement. He thought in systems, in logical progressions. This could be Social Security. Frank's number started with 457, but not 4457. It could be Chicago, where we'd lived our entire marriage. 0815 made me pause. August 15th, our wedding anniversary. This was harder. Frank's initials were FS. Mine were DS. Dorothy Sullivan. My initials. The code included my initials. I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Swiss bank accounts used codes like this. So did offshore investment firms. 3 hours later I found it. Secure Solutions Investment Management, based in the Cayman Islands. Their website was discreet, professional, catering to high-net-worth individuals seeking privacy and security. The account login page required a client number and password. With trembling fingers, I typed in SS4457CH0815DS in the client number field. Valid account number appeared on the screen. Now I needed the password. Something only I would know, something Frank knew I would figure out. I tried our wedding date, our address, my birthday. Nothing. Then I remembered the note. Dorothy's birthday, July 15, 1955. The day I knew I'd marry her. Not my actual birthday. July 15th was the day we met at a summer dance in Millennium Park. Frank always said he knew that night he'd marry me someday. I typed in 071555 and held my breath. Access granted. The screen that loaded next made me gasp. Current account balance, $2,470,296.77. Frank had hidden nearly $3 million from me for our entire marriage. I stared at the screen until the numbers burned themselves into my retinas. $2.8 million in an account I'd never known existed, in a bank I'd never heard of, hidden by a husband who'd spent 43 years convincing me we were living paycheck to paycheck. Every argument we'd had about money, every time I'd clipped coupons or bought generic groceries or patched Frank's work shirts instead of buying new ones. All of it while he had millions sitting in an offshore account. My first instinct was anger. Pure, white-hot rage at the deception, at the lies by omission, at 43 years of wondering if we'd have enough for retirement while Frank secretly stashed away a fortune. But then I clicked on the account history. The first deposit was made in 1982, 3 years after Mike was born. $5,000. The notation read, Initial Inheritance Investment, FS Inheritance. Frank had never mentioned any inheritance. I scrolled through years of deposits, all relatively small. $500 here, $1,000 there. Regular contributions that explained why Frank had been so careful with our household budget. He hadn't been hiding money from our income. He'd been systematically building something separate. The deposits continued steadily until 2008, then jumped dramatically. Instead of hundreds of dollars, Frank had been depositing $10,000 and $20,000 at a time. The notation on those larger deposits made my blood run cold. Real estate liquidation, Chicago properties. Frank had been buying and selling real estate without my knowledge. Properties I'd never seen, investments I'd never been consulted about, business dealings that had apparently made him wealthy. How do you live with someone for 43 years and not know they're conducting secret business transactions? I clicked on the account messages and found a folder labeled, For Dorothy, Emergency Access Only. Inside was a video file uploaded just 3 months before Frank died. I hesitated before clicking play. Whatever Frank had to say about this secret fortune, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. But I was alone in our bedroom at midnight. My son had stolen the only clue to this mystery, and I was apparently wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. Ready or not, I needed answers. Frank's face filled the screen, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He was sitting in his office at work, probably having recorded this during his lunch break. Dorothy, if you're watching this, I'm gone and something's gone wrong. His voice was steady but his eyes looked sad. I hoped you'd never need to access this account, that we'd grow old together and I'd eventually tell you about it over dinner someday. He paused, rubbing his face with the same gesture he'd used whenever he was working through a difficult problem. The money isn't mine, sweetheart. It was my father's, hidden away before he died in 1981. He made me promise to keep it secret, to protect it, to only use it if our family was ever in real danger. Frank's father had died when Mike was 2. I remembered Frank being devastated, remembered the modest inheritance that had paid off our mortgage. Apparently there had been much more to it. My father saw what the Depression did to families, how quickly stability could disappear. He wanted to make sure his grandchildren would always be protected, no matter what happened. Frank looked directly into the camera and I felt like he was sitting right next to me. I've been investing the money carefully, conservatively. Every penny is documented. Every transaction is legal. It's grown because I've been reinvesting for 40 years, but the original amount was meant to be emergency money, insurance against catastrophe. The video continued with Frank explaining the account details, the investment strategy, the legal protections he'd put in place, but I was stuck on one phrase. I hoped you'd never need to access this account. Frank had died of a heart attack at work. Sudden, unexpected, no warning signs. How could he have known I'd need this money? Unless the catastrophe he'd been protecting against wasn't random. Unless Frank had known something about our family that I was just beginning to understand. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the library. For the first time in 6 months, I had something more important to do than organizing returned books and shushing teenagers. I needed to understand what Frank had meant by real danger. The investment account had detailed records going back 40 years, but I started with the recent transactions. Frank's last deposit had been made just 2 weeks before he died. $25,000 with the notation property sale, emergency liquidation. Emergency liquidation. Frank had been converting assets to cash right before his death. I spent the morning researching every property transaction Frank had made. The man I'd been married to for 43 years had apparently been a secret real estate mogul, buying and selling properties all over Chicago with money I didn't know we had. But here's what made my blood run cold. Every property Frank had sold in the last year had been purchased by the same buyer, a company called Sullivan Investments LLC. Sullivan was Mike's last name too. I grabbed my phone and called my nephew Danny, who worked in real estate. If anyone would know about property transactions in Chicago, it would be Danny. Aunt. How are you holding up? I'm fine, honey. Listen, I need to ask you about something. Have you ever heard of a company called Sullivan Investments LLC? Danny was quiet for a moment. Actually, yeah. They've been pretty active lately, buying up properties in good neighborhoods. Cash deals moving fast. Why? Do you know who owns the company? I can find out. Give me an hour. I spent that hour going through Frank's desk more carefully, looking for any documentation about his real estate dealings. Hidden in the back of his filing cabinet, behind 40 years of tax returns, I found a folder marked Insurance Policies. But instead of insurance documents, the folder contained contracts, property deeds, and correspondence related to Frank's investments. At the bottom of the pile was a letter that made my hands shake. It was from a private investigator, dated 6 months before Frank's death. Mr. Sullivan, per your request, I've completed the investigation into your son Michael Sullivan's financial activities. My findings are concerning. Your son has accumulated approximately $180,000 in gambling debts to several offshore betting sites. He's also taken out multiple high-interest loans against his business using fraudulent information about his income and assets. Of greater concern are the inquiries Mr. Sullivan has been making about your estate. He's contacted 3 different lawyers asking about inheritance law and the process for contesting wills. He's also made inquiries about power of attorney procedures and elder care facilities. I believe your son is planning to have you declared incompetent in order to gain control of your assets. The paperwork I've uncovered suggests he's been researching this option for several months. I recommend taking immediate steps to protect your assets and ensure your wife's financial security. Regards, Thomas Chin, private investigator. My phone rang. Vinny. Aunt. You're not going to believe this. Sullivan Investments LLC is owned by Mike Sullivan. You're Mike. I closed my eyes. The pieces finally falling into place. Frank hadn't been hiding money from me. He'd been hiding it from Mike. Every property sale, every cash deposit, every emergency liquidation had been Frank systematically moving assets out of Mike's reach. Frank had known his own son was planning to rob us. But Frank had died before he could warn me, leaving only the hidden compartment in his watch as a clue to find the truth. My son hadn't stolen Frank's Rolex for vacation money. He'd stolen it because he was looking for exactly what I'd found: access to Frank's hidden fortune. And now that Mike knew I'd found something in the watch, he wouldn't stop until he figured out what it was. I was still sitting in Frank's chair, staring at the private investigator's report, when I heard Ashley's key in my front door. She'd had a spare key since the funeral, ostensibly to check on me when Mike was working. Now I understood she'd been checking on Frank's assets. Dorothy, are you here? Ashley's voice echoed through the house, artificially sweet. Mike and I stopped by before heading to the airport. I quickly shoved the investigator's report back into the folder and minimized the offshore account on my laptop screen. Whatever game Mike and Ashley were playing, I needed to understand the rules before I revealed my hand. In the bedroom, I called back. They appeared in the doorway moments later. Mike carrying a small suitcase and Ashley wearing the kind of outfit that screamed expensive vacation. Her designer sunglasses probably cost more than most people's rent. Just wanted to say goodbye, Mike said, but his eyes were scanning Frank's desk, taking inventory of the papers spread around me. What are you working on? Sorting through your father's things, I said carefully. There's so much I never knew about. Ashley stepped closer, her gaze focused on my laptop screen. Find anything interesting? The question sounded casual, but I caught the sharp attention in her voice. These weren't courtesy visits. They were reconnaissance missions. Just old bank statements and tax records. Your father was very thorough with his paperwork. Mike relaxed slightly. Yeah, Dad was obsessive about record keeping. Probably kept every receipt from the last 20 years. Actually, I said, deciding to test their reaction, I did find something odd. Your father had some kind of investment account I didn't know about. Nothing major, just a few thousand. The change in both their expressions was immediate and unmistakable. Mike stepped forward, trying to appear casual but failing completely. An investment account? What kind? I'm not sure yet. The paperwork is confusing. I might need to hire an accountant to help me figure it out. Ashley exchanged a quick glance with Mike. We could help you with that. Mike's good with financial documents. I bet he is, I thought, remembering the private investigator's report about Mike's gambling debts and fraudulent loan applications. That's very kind. But I already made an appointment with Frank's old accounting firm. They'll know how to handle his investments properly. Mike's jaw tightened. Mom, those guys charge $300 an hour. I can look at the paperwork for free. I can afford $300 an hour, Mike. The silence that followed was loaded with tension. Ashley's mask of concern was slipping, revealing the calculating woman underneath. Mike was practically vibrating with frustrated energy. We should probably get going, Ashley said finally. Don't want to miss our flight. But Mike didn't move. Mom, about the message you found in Dad's watch. Maybe I should take a look at those numbers before we leave, just to make sure they're not something important. What numbers? Ashley asked sharply. Mike shot her a warning look. Mom found some kind of code in the watch. Probably nothing, but you never know. Now Ashley was fully alert, her vacation excitement replaced by laser focus. What kind of code? I stood up slowly, using my full height to look down at my daughter-in-law. The kind that's none of your business. Ashley's face flushed red. Excuse me. You heard me. My husband left me a private message. Private being the operative word. Mom. Mike stepped between us, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. We're family. There's no need for secrets. Secrets? I almost laughed at the irony. Like the secret gambling debts or the secret company you've been using to buy properties with money you don't have? The color drained from Mike's face. Ashley's mouth fell open. I don't know what you're talking about, Mike said, but his voice was shaky now. Sullivan Investments LC, ring a bell? I watched both their faces go pale. Your father knew, Mike. He knew everything. Ashley recovered first, her voice turning vicious. You crazy old woman. You don't know anything. I know your husband owes $180,000 to offshore gambling sites. I know he's been researching how to have me declared incompetent, and I know he's been planning this for months. Mike slumped against the doorframe like his strings had been cut. The fight went out of him completely. How? He whispered. Your father hired a private investigator. Every lie, every debt, every plan you made to steal from us, it's all documented. I walked to the desk and pulled out the investigator's report, watching Mike's face as he recognized the letterhead. Frank protected me from you even after his death. That code you're so interested in? It's the key to more money than you've ever dreamed of. Money that will never ever belong to you. Ashley grabbed Mike's arm. We need to leave now. But Mike was staring at me with something that looked like respect for the first time in years. He really knew. He knew his son was planning to rob his own mother. What kind of man does that make you, Mike? For just a moment Mike looked like the little boy I'd raised, confused and ashamed. Then Ashley's grip on his arm tightened and the moment passed. This isn't over, Ashley hissed as they headed for the door. Yes, it is, I called after them. It's been over since the day you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. The front door slammed, leaving me alone with my husband's secrets and the knowledge that the real fight was just beginning. 2 days after Mike and Ashley's dramatic exit, my doorbell rang at 8 o'clock in the morning. Through the peephole I saw a woman in an expensive suit holding a briefcase. Behind her stood a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a law school catalog. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Catherine Wells from Wells, Morrison and Associates. This is my colleague David Kim. We represent your son Michael in some family legal matters. Family legal matters. That was one way to put it. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. What can I do for you? Catherine smiled with the kind of practiced warmth that probably cost $300 an hour. Mrs. Sullivan, your son is concerned about your well-being. He's asked us to discuss some options that might be beneficial for everyone involved, such as... David stepped forward, pulling out a tablet. We understand you may have discovered some financial accounts that your late husband kept private. While we're sure he had good intentions, managing complex investments can be overwhelming, especially during the grieving process. Overwhelming. As if I hadn't spent 40 years managing our household finances down to the penny while Frank secretly played real estate mogul. I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Catherine's smile never wavered. Of course you are, but consider this. Your son could help shoulder that burden. We've drafted some documents that would give Michael power of attorney over your financial decisions. Just temporarily until you've had time to properly grieve. There was exactly what Frank's private investigator had warned about. Temporarily, I repeated. And who determines when my grieving period is over? David exchanged a glance with Catherine. That would be at your discretion, naturally. Naturally. I stepped back toward my door. Gentlemen, I think we're done here. Mrs. Sullivan. Catherine's voice sharpened slightly. Your son is prepared to file a petition with the court regarding your mental competency. He's concerned about some erratic financial decisions you've been making. What erratic decisions? Accessing offshore accounts, conducting international financial transactions without professional guidance. To an outside observer, it might appear that you're not thinking clearly. The threat was crystal clear. Sign over power of attorney voluntarily, or they'd have me declared incompetent by force. You know what's interesting about threats? I asked, leaning against my doorframe. They only work if the person you're threatening doesn't have better lawyers than you do. Catherine's professional mask slipped slightly. I beg your pardon? I said you can tell my son that his plan won't work. Frank left me more than just money. He left me protection. I closed the door in their faces and immediately called the number I'd found in Frank's hidden files. Thomas Chin, the private investigator, answered on the second ring. Mr. Chin, this is Dorothy Sullivan, Frank Sullivan's widow. Mrs. Sullivan, I've been expecting your call. Frank told me you might need my services someday. He did. About 6 months ago, Frank asked me to prepare a comprehensive legal defense package in case anyone tried to challenge your competency or your right to his assets. Everything's ready to go. Frank had been 3 steps ahead even in death. How ready, Mr. Chin? By the time I'm done presenting evidence of your son's gambling debts, fraudulent loan applications, and attempts to manipulate elderly family members, he'll be lucky if he doesn't face criminal charges. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. Mr. Chin, I think it's time to make some phone calls. Thomas Chen's office was in a sleek downtown building that screamed expensive legal services. But as I sat across from him reviewing Frank's defense package, I realized my husband had been planning for this confrontation long before he died. Your husband was thorough, Thomas said, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. Bank records showing Mike's gambling losses, audio recordings of him discussing plans to have you declared incompetent, even photographs of him meeting with estate planning lawyers. Audio recordings? Thomas nodded grimly. Frank suspected Mike was planning something, so he had your house wired for sound last year. Completely legal since it was his own property. I thought about all the conversations Mike and Ashley had had in my kitchen over the past 6 months. Every dismissive comment about my mental state, every calculation about Frank's assets, every cruel joke about putting me in a nursing home. Frank had heard it all. There's more, Thomas continued. Frank also discovered that Ashley has been systematically isolating you from family and friends. She's been telling people you're becoming senile, that you need supervision. The pieces clicked into place. Why my sister-in-law had stopped calling. Why neighbors seemed awkward when they saw me. Why my book club friends had been treating me like I was fragile. Ashley had been conducting a whisper campaign, preparing the groundwork for Mike's legal challenge. How extensive is the evidence? Extensive enough to destroy any competency challenge and probably land them both in jail for elder abuse and attempted fraud. Thomas pulled out a thick folder. But there's something else. Frank left specific instructions about what to do if you ever needed to access the offshore account. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Frank's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 1 week before Frank's death. "My dearest Dorothy, if you're reading this, then Mike has shown his true colors and you've discovered the account I've been building for 40 years. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about it while I was alive, but I needed to protect it from Mike until the time was right. The money isn't just an inheritance. It's justice. Every penny came from investments I made using information Mike thought he was hiding from us. When he started his real estate company, he would brag about his inside deals and guaranteed investments. What he didn't know was that I was listening and investing in the same opportunities with money he didn't know existed. Mike unknowingly funded his own downfall. Every property he flipped, I bought 3 more in the same area. Every stock tip he mentioned, I invested in with money from our original inheritance. The offshore account exists because I used Mike's own greed against him. Now it's your turn to use his greed against him. Thomas has instructions to make the account transfers immediately. By the time you read this letter, you'll have financial independence Mike can never touch, but more importantly, you'll have the power to choose how this ends. You can forgive him, take care of him despite his betrayal and hope he learns to be a better man, or you can let him face the consequences of trying to steal from his own mother. The choice is yours, my love. It always has been. Forever yours, Frank." I set the letter down with shaking hands. Frank hadn't just protected me from Mike. He'd orchestrated Mike's downfall using Mike's own schemes against him. "Mrs. Sullivan," Thomas was watching me carefully. "Are you ready to proceed?" I thought about Mike as a little boy excited about his first day of school. Then I thought about him standing in my kitchen 2 days ago, calling me a crazy old woman while his wife threatened me. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. "Mr. Chin, I want you to file every piece of evidence we have with the appropriate authorities, and I want you to do it today." The next morning brought chaos to my quiet Chicago neighborhood. I was sipping coffee and reading the newspaper when 3 black SUVs pulled up to Mike and Ashley's house across the street. Men in FBI windbreakers started carrying boxes out of their front door. My phone rang immediately. "Mom." Mike's voice was panicked, desperate. "What did you do?" "I protected myself," I said calmly, watching through my kitchen window as agents loaded computers and filing cabinets into their vehicles. "What you should have done for your family instead of trying to rob them. You don't understand. This will destroy us. You destroyed yourselves. I just documented it." Ashley's voice came through the phone, shrill and angry. "You vindictive old witch. We were trying to help you," I finished for her, "by stealing my husband's watch, by planning to have me declared incompetent, by spreading lies about my mental health to isolate me from friends and family." The line went quiet except for Ashley's ragged breathing. "Frank knew everything, Mike. Every debt, every lie, every plan you made to rob us. He spent the last year of his life protecting me from his own son. Dad wouldn't. Your father hired a private investigator to document your gambling addiction and your plans to steal my inheritance. He had our house wired for sound so he could record every conversation you had about putting me in a nursing home." I heard Mike make a sound like a wounded animal. "The FBI is seizing your business records because Frank's evidence shows you've been using fraudulent information to secure loans. The IRS is auditing you because you've been hiding income. And the state attorney's office is investigating you for elder abuse." "Mom, please." Mike's voice broke. "I never meant for it to go this far. When did it start, Mike? When did you decide your mother was worth more to you dead than alive?" Long silence. When Mike spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "When I realized Dad had been hiding money from us. I saw some paperwork in his office last Christmas, references to accounts I'd never heard of. But I thought if you both died, everything would come to me automatically. The honesty was brutal, but somehow cleaner than the months of lies and manipulation. You were wrong. Frank made sure everything would be protected from you." "How much?" Mike asked. "How much did he hide?" "Enough to ensure I never have to depend on family who sees me as a burden." I hung up and watched through the window as FBI agents escorted Mike and Ashley to separate cars. Ashley was screaming at the agents, probably demanding lawyers and threatening lawsuits. Mike just looked broken. My phone rang again. This time it was my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Dorothy, I just wanted to call and apologize. Ashley told me you were having memory problems and I believed her. I should have talked to you directly. It's all right, Helen. Ashley can be very convincing. Is it true what they're saying? That Mike was planning to steal from you. I looked at Frank's picture on the mantel, remembering the man who'd protected me even after death. It's true, but it's over now. 3 weeks later, I sat in Thomas Chen's office reviewing the final legal documents. Mike and Ashley were facing federal fraud charges. Their business had been seized and their assets frozen pending investigation. But that morning had brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Sullivan, there's someone here to see you, Thomas's secretary announced. Says his name is Richard Torres and he has something that belongs to you. The man who entered was in his 60s, well-dressed, with the kind of careful demeanor that suggested a law enforcement background. In his hands was a familiar blue velvet box. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm the one who bought your husband's watch from the pawn shop. I stared at him, confused. How did you know to find me? Richard smiled and set the box on Thomas's desk. Because Frank Sullivan hired me 20 years ago to protect this watch if anything ever happened to him. I don't understand. I'm a retired federal marshal, Mrs. Sullivan. Your husband contracted me to monitor certain situations. When the watch appeared at Golden State Pawn, I was notified immediately. Thomas was taking notes furiously. You were surveillance on Mike Sullivan? Among other things. Frank was thorough in his preparations. Richard opened the velvet box, revealing Frank's Rolex. But there's something else you need to know about this watch. He turned it over and pressed something on the back. A second hidden compartment opened, smaller than the first. Inside was a microSD card. Frank recorded everything, Mrs. Sullivan. Every conversation Mike had about manipulating you, every meeting with lawyers about declaring you incompetent, every discussion about what to do with your assets after you were gone. The room spun slightly. Frank was recording Mike for 18 months. Audio, video, financial records, everything needed to ensure Mike could never successfully challenge your mental competency or your right to Frank's inheritance. Richard inserted the SD card into Thomas's computer. The screen filled with folder after folder of evidence. Audio recordings, video files, financial documents, even photographs of Mike meeting with lawyers and gamblers. Your husband loved you enough to spend the last 2 years of his life building an unbreakable legal defense against his own son. I thought about Frank's final months, how stressed he'd seemed, how many work meetings he'd had in the evenings. He hadn't been hiding from me. He'd been protecting me. There's one more thing, Richard said quietly. Frank left specific instructions about what to do if Mike ever tried to have you declared incompetent. He pulled out a sealed envelope marked Final Instructions, Dorothy's Protection Plan. Inside was a document that made my breath catch. In the event that Michael Sullivan attempts legal action against Dorothy Sullivan's mental competency, the following assets will be transferred immediately to the Chicago Children's Hospital in Michael Sullivan's name. All property owned by Sullivan Investments, LLC. All gambling debts and outstanding loans. All legal fees and court costs associated with elder abuse charges. Michael Sullivan will be personally responsible for all debts and legal consequences while receiving no benefit from any inheritance or asset transfer. Frank had arranged for Mike to inherit his own destruction. Your husband was a brilliant man, Thomas said admiringly. He turned Mike's greed into a legal trap. Frank knew Mike would never stop trying to get the money, Richard explained, so he made sure that any attempt to steal from you would result in Mike losing everything he already had. I picked up Frank's watch, feeling its familiar weight in my hands. For 43 years I'd thought I was married to a simple accountant who worried about money and saved every penny. Instead, I'd been married to a master strategist who'd spent 2 years orchestrating the most elaborate protection plan in legal history. Mrs. Sullivan, Richard said gently, your husband asked me to give you a final message if this day ever came. He handed me one last envelope, this one unsealed. Inside, in Frank's handwriting, Dorothy, you were always stronger than you knew. I just made sure you'd have the tools to prove it. Love always, Frank. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Chicago Children's Hospital, watching workers install a brass plaque that read, the Frank Sullivan Memorial Wing. Funded by Dorothy Sullivan had been more than enough to secure my future and fund the hospital expansion he'd always dreamed about. The final irony was that Mike's attempt to steal from me had directly resulted in the largest charitable donation in the hospital's history. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Chin. Mike's sentencing hearing is next week. They're recommending 2 years federal prison plus full restitution. Ashley took a plea deal for 18 months. Still want to attend? I typed back, no, I have better things to do. And I did. At 73, I was finally living the life Frank had protected for me. I'd bought a small house near the lake, joined 3 book clubs, and started volunteering at the hospital twice a week. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what my family expected. My doorbell rang as I was preparing dinner. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman with Mike's eyes and a nervous smile. Grandma Dorothy, it's Melissa, Mike's daughter. I hadn't seen her since Frank's funeral. When she was finishing college and starting her first job, Ashley had made sure to cut me off from the grandchildren along with everyone else. I opened the door. Melissa, what a surprise. I know I should have called first. She was twisting her hands nervously. I heard about Dad and Ashley, about what they did to you. I wanted to apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. I do though. I knew something was wrong. Dad kept asking weird questions about Grandpa Frank's finances, and Ashley was always making comments about your memory. I should have said something. I studied my granddaughter's face, seeing Frank's honesty there along with Mike's features. Come in, sweetheart. Let's talk. Over dinner, Melissa told me about her new job teaching elementary school, her engagement to a young doctor, and her guilt about her father's crimes. I keep thinking I should visit him in prison, she said. But I'm so angry about what he did to you. Anger is normal, but Mike is still your father. How can you not hate him? I thought about Frank's letter, about the choice he'd given me between forgiveness and justice. Because hate would mean he still had power over me. I choose peace instead. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. I missed you so much. Ashley told everyone you were getting confused, that you didn't want to see us anymore. I never stopped wanting to see you, and I never will. As Melissa helped me clear the dishes, she paused at Frank's photo on the mantel. I always wondered why Grandpa Frank wore that watch every single day. He must have really loved it. I smiled, thinking about the 2 hidden compartments, the offshore account, the elaborate protection plan that had saved my life. He loved what it protected. That night, after Melissa left with promises to visit every week, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. Frank's watch was on my wrist, keeping perfect time. He'd been gone 8 months, but somehow he was still taking care of me. The greatest love stories aren't about passion or romance. They're about protection. About someone loving you enough to fight battles you don't even know you're facing. Frank had spent 2 years preparing for a war I never saw coming, ensuring that his death wouldn't leave me defenseless against his own son's greed. Some people spend their whole lives looking for that kind of love. I was lucky enough to wear it on my wrist for 43 years. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Please subscribe my channel.